Hello, welcome to Questions for Atheists. My name is Scott, and today we will be answering further questions about what if you're wrong? So, the first question we have on our list is actually something that kind of goes back to Blaise Pascal's argument, and that is, wouldn't the best choice be to research religions and choose the best supported one rather than choosing none? And before I get into the reasoning behind this, I just want to say that, yeah, this is pretty much the best way to decide in these circumstances. Do your research and choose based on the evidence. But abstaining from the choice is also a valid option. And that's exactly what I've done. I've looked at the evidence for the religions that I have examined, and not just the evidence that supports them, but the evidence that refutes them, and the evidence that we should see if they are true, but that we don't actually see. And then after reviewing all of that, I have yet to find a single one that has met its burden of proof and is worth believing. So, to get back to what I was saying about the origin of this question, it seems to me to come back to what Blaise Pascal was talking about in his wager, where avoiding an infinite punishment is best even when the evidence to support that is almost zero, and hence you should bet on, something to avoid a hell rather than just choosing none and saying, I'm betting on no reward and risking, even the slight chance of infinite punishment. Essentially, since we can't possibly avoid every hell, why not pick one of them so you're diminishing the probability you go to some hell by some slight amount? But what if there is a God that wants us to use reason and will punish us for believing things without reason? Even if we did end up believing in that God, we would risk incurring their wrath anyways, and what's the point in that? Now, I'm not aware of any religion that actually claims there's a deity like that, but this is the kind of intellectually honest and moral evaluation that I would give to someone in such a situation, and I have to think that a deity, if they were also intelligent and moral, would have a similar, at least, if not the same, conclusion. And all of this, of course, is without even considering the cost of believing in one of those religions, which brings us to our next question. Why do you say that the cost of choosing a faith is too high for you? So, for one thing, I want to believe things based on good evidence. I want to believe as much truth and as few falsehoods as possible. And this is why I look at evidence for religions instead of relying on arguments like this wager to decide if they're worth believing. And as far as I'm concerned, choosing to believe a religion for the sake of getting into its heaven or avoiding its hell means I have to give up that goal. And that's not something I want to do, because when people believe things without good reasons, they risk believing terrible things that make the world a worse place. And even if the religion I ended up believing in had no commandments or prohibitions that I would find objectionable, by believing it without reason, I'm giving up my ability to determine what is really good or bad. Essentially, once I open up the door and recognize that I have one belief that has no basis, I can essentially pick any belief that I want without any basis and just believe that as well. I could believe a terrible thing is good or a good thing is terrible. Now, the other reason that the cost is too high is I am no longer the kind of person who would even be capable of believing something like this for personal gain instead of evidence. I would have to work at fundamentally changing who I am in order to accept a religion, and I don't see how or why I would do this. That is to say that even if I wanted to believe, it's not possible for me, and I'm not going to pretend to, since I would know I'm being disingenuous, and whatever deity I believed in, if they existed, would also know, and I don't see how anything good could come of a situation like that. Now, for those of you wondering why I say it's not possible for me to believe this at all, that actually brings us to our third question. Why do you say that belief is not something you can choose? Now, I've heard people use definitions of faith that involve choosing to believe something even when there is no evidence or in the face of evidence against it, but as far as I'm concerned, that's not really belief. And the reason for this is that you can't voluntarily change what you believe. And to illustrate this, let's imagine that you love pancakes and hate waffles. Or if you want to change the scenario in your head to make it a little easier, just switch those around. And one day you wake up and find yourself tied to a chair and hooked up to a polygraph machine. And two men are in front of you. One steps forward and points a gun to your head and asks you, "Which do you like more, pancake or waffles? Answer truthfully or I will kill you." And then the second man steps forward and points another gun at your head and says, "If you say that you like pancakes more, I will kill you." Now, what do you do? Can you really choose to like something in this situation? No matter how much you really, really want to love waffles, can you actually change what you believe? Now, of course, something like this can actually change over time, and you might even be able to voluntarily change it over time. But at the moment when it matters, this isn't something that you can change. And in this example, this is something that you can change your belief about because it's inconsequential. Do you really care that much about pancakes and waffles in the grand scheme of things? But what about something big, something your identity is founded on? If you're a theist, could you choose right now to believe that there is no God? You could perhaps say it, but is it even possible for you to actually believe that by choice? And it's not possible. And that's because you are convinced of it, and you don't choose what convinces you. It happens to you whether you want it to or not. And people really shouldn't believe in a God by choice. They should believe because they are convinced. And right now, I'm not convinced, so until I am, it's just not possible for me to believe. So, our fourth question is, are you saying that you are relying on your good works to get into heaven? And this question arises from the end of my previous video where I said that I am basically relying on my sincerity and my pursuit of truth to get into the good graces of any deity that exists out there if there should be an afterlife and my soul was called before them. And especially in religions like Christianity, there is a delineation between faith and good works, and most of them say that you need to have, at the very least, faith in a deity to get into its heaven, and good works won't actually be enough. And since I don't have any faith, I'm essentially just relying on the goodness that I do in life. Now, I've examined religions, and I haven't found good reasons to believe in them, so I'm pretty much ignoring the claims that you need faith from these different religions. But let's suppose that there is a God and that that God is moral. When they examine my life, are they going to care more about my actions or my motivations? And sure, my actions are still worth considering and important, but shouldn't my motivations count more? So let's use everyone's favorite kind of analogy, a courtroom analogy, again. A man is standing trial for murder, but the defense shows that he killed his victim because the victim was in turn trying to kill someone else. The action of killing someone is immoral, but his motive was to defend someone's life. So wouldn't the court care more about his motive rather than his action, at least in sentencing? But let's say that after the defense makes its case, the defendant stands up and says that he didn't even know about the other person that he saved. He just really wanted to kill his victim. Now, how is the court going to handle his sentence? It's back to a murder charge. So actions certainly have some kind of consequence, but the motivation is the deciding factor instead of deed. And a god with the powers many religions pose should be able to see those motivations. A moral being should care more about the reason you did something than what you actually did. And so they should care more about your motivations rather than whether you believed something. Essentially, belief, despite any reason, should not be their first concern. It should be the reasons you have for believing something or not believing something. So with that, we come to our fifth and final question. What will you tell God when you die? And I'm pretty sure that this question comes from a Christian perspective. So let's assume that when I die and meet God, He is a deity that intends to punish me for not believing in Him. I will tell Him that I did the best I could to determine if He really existed, And based on the evidence that he made available to me, I had no choice but to conclude that he did not exist. And if that was what he truly wanted from me, why didn't he give me better evidence or talk to me directly? Why did he give me an abundance of evidence that seemed to directly contradict his existence, and expect me to believe in him based on arguments that don't seem to match reality and bad testimonials? I will ask him, since he had the power to convince me and failed to do so, why is he punishing me for something that is ultimately his fault? I will ask him, how can he claim to be a moral being if he is punishing only the lack of belief and not anything that has to do with morality? Now, I don't think any god in this kind of situation would be immoral, but I don't have any kind of power to dissent against such a god either. So while my questions perhaps might get under that god's skin if he cares at all, ultimately they probably would be pointless in such a situation, but I would still ask because that god is essentially pretending to be moral. And even though he probably doesn't care, I want to point it out that he is in fact not. So that's the end of our questions for this week. If you have any more questions or comments about this or any other topic, please leave a comment below or send it to questionsforatheists@gmail.com. And I will see you next week. Goodbye.